Welcome back to the Ripewave audio community. My name is John, and for this video, we finally get our Onkyo AV receiver 2021 video out that covers the new 8K models. This is the TX-Rz50, the TX-NR7100, the 6100, which is planned but not probably available till November, and the NR5100. Now, like what we did in the Pioneer video, we will also cover other models in the Onkyo range to kind of show you where these fit into the portfolio. And also, we're going to do something a little different than with the Pioneer. We're actually doing a comparison against Pioneer models to really learn where the positioning is of Onkyo versus Pioneer. We found this was extremely difficult. In fact, this video took a lot longer than the Pioneer video, and we'll put the links to the Pioneer one. And we're not going to cover, while this is a comparison, we're not going to cover all the points that we did in the Pioneer, so we still invite you to look back at that one to really see the details on the Pioneer models. But this is tricky because there's not a real clear positioning between Onkyo and Pioneer. It seems like they really said, okay, we have some of our audience, the people who buy the Pioneer brand, they buy it, they like these attributes. The Onkyo buyers like a little different attributes. So in some cases, you'll see things that appear to be better in Onkyo, in some cases things appear to be better in Pioneer. So there isn't a clear positioning, one better than the other. And of course there's their Integra brand, which we haven't covered yet, which is designed for the custom integrator market. So with all this, I'll point out these are the first new models since the 11 trading company has taken management of these brands. And this is done with the same parent company as the Klipsch Group. So the Klipsch Group and the 11 Trading Company are part of Vox's premium audio division. And so these companies work, these divisions work in parallel but cooperatively with each other. Before we get into the details that we have on this, I did want to mention as we said, we've been working on this video for a couple weeks here now, and a couple of days ago, Home Theater Fanatics, the YouTube site that Jiles runs there, which he does a fantastic job, just put out a live stream with the Onkyo product managers, Rob and Rolf, and that's a very good use of an hour and a half to, if you really want to hear some details. They're covering some different points than we do here. There's some overlap. I think if you put the two together, you got a pretty good picture of what's going on with the Onkyo brand. So let's get into this. And we started to look at which models were comparable. As far as the way these look, looking at the 2019 models, such as the RZ840 and comparing against the new RZ50, they haven't changed the front cosmetics of these. These look almost identical other than the model number at the bottom here. And so it's really what's going on inside of these that's really the difference in most cases here. There's some subtle differences when you get around the block, the back here. Maybe if the silk screen's a little different. Placement is generally the same, although some things move a little slightly, but very, very similar between the 2019 models and what you see coming out in 2022. And that was similar to what we saw with Pioneer as well. Looking at the top of the range, so with Onkyo, these new models come out kind of below the top tier. So Onkyo starts at their RZ3100, and I'll mention right off the bat here that the RZ series is really Onkyo's top range. It's like Pioneer Elite, but Pioneer Elite goes a little lower as far as the price point. So Onkyo cuts off the RZ series before going into their standard network receivers, their NR. range here. So if you see RZ in the model number, that's their top series, RZ series, and if they see NR, that is the standard series. And I think that's a better way to go, to not have so many models all in the top tier. It starts to dilute the brand. So looking at this first one, we see something interesting right away here. This was their flagship, the TX-RZ3100. It had a list price of $3,399. If you go on the Onkyo website today, there's a deep discount on that. They're trying to, I think, move these out the door to make room for the newer models coming in. So this comes in now with a sale price of $1,499. And it does have some capabilities, more channels, etc., that you won't see in some of the new models. So it then becomes a tough decision if you're looking for some of these features and want 8K as well. It's interesting to note that the next model down, the RZ1100, which was originally positioned at a lower cost, now is $100 more at $1,599. So the bargain really is with that old top of the model. So if you're choosing between the 3111, well, with the discount, the 3100 is the better deal. As we move down the portfolio, we finally get to one of the new models, and this is the first model with 8K, which is the TX-Rz50, and this is the model that everyone is talking about in the new release. So again, looking very similar to the older product. Now, some of the other older models are still available, like the RZ840, and this is very similar to the as the Z50. And the next new model is the NR7100, and now we see the shift from the RZ series to the NR series with the 7100, and this is the top model in the network receiver NR series. And you can see here some cosmetic changes between the series. Gone is the input selection wheel, and now you have push buttons like I saw in the Onkyo receivers we had in the 80s, where you pick the input signal that you want. And the gone is the door that hides a lot of the controls. You have the phono jack right on the front. Again, thank you, Onkyo, for putting a 1/4-inch jack on all these models, either behind the door or right on the front panel. And then you've got some other quick access inputs as well, as such as HDMI. The NR797 is the 2019 model. Again, has a very similar cosmetic. So we're not seeing, even in the NR series, a change in the cosmetics here. The NR6100, which is not due out until November, thereabouts. Now, there's been issues of getting production facilities up to speed, and once they're able to produce product, getting that product out to the various countries that want these. So there's been some delays. I don't think this is a conscious decision to delay the shipment of the 6100, which sits right in the middle of their NR series. But you'll notice here now they've moved the tone controls from a wheel adjustment to buttons right in the center of the unit. So there is a little slight cosmetic change here when you moved to the 6100. Now the model that's replacing the NR696, that's the 2019 model, still available as well. That did still have the tone wheel on it. The NR5100 is the entry level for the new models that are coming out. So this is your entry point for 8K, and looks very much like the 6100. And also note that as you go down the line, you've actually lost some other things, like instead of having a removable power, you've gone to a hardwired connection. And the most entry-level model that's still available is a 2019 model, which is the NR595. I suspect that this will go away shortly. Looking at Onkyo side by side, just cosmetically here, there is a difference in the way they feel. Pioneer at least in the US, likes to put the gold lettering on there, versus Onkyo has the silver and has a more of a I would say a cleaner look, which is the Pioneer's a glossier look. That's just my feeling on the cosmetics, but front and back they're very similar. They put the buttons in a little different place. They use wheels versus buttons in some cases. Different color screens, yellow versus green, turquoise, or whatever you want to call that. But again, very, very similar. It's interesting, these comparable, the 505 versus the RZ50. The Onkyo model is a little taller. That adds up to what you see in the dimension specs. I don't know if that's just done for cosmetic reasons or there's actually something inside that needs that extra height. I can't say for sure. And then here's looking at the 305 versus the 7100. These are peer models between brands, and you can see that both at this price point and in moving down to this tier of product, you lose the hidden door, which I'm not really worried about. I don't think that adds much. And then the lower tier, the entry-level models, the Pioneer 105 versus the Onkyo NR69100. Again, you can see the cosmetic differences, but the similarities on the back. Looking inside these, we really haven't been able to find an interior shot of the new models. But when you look at these models from the inside, and here's where, again, it's very difficult to see a clear quality difference between Pioneer and Onkyo. But there are some differences. You can see there's some platform similarities, like they both have a fan on it. Here we're looking at the RZ3100 from Onkyo versus the 904 from Pioneer. The limb of the boards look slightly different, although that top board, which probably is HDMI board, yes, I think it is. I think that looks similar, but some of the chips are placed slightly different, although these are slightly different generations, so that's a tough comparison between 2016 and 2019. But we're seeing at least the build quality is very similar. They both use the same type of I-core transformer, which is typical in receivers because you need the lower voltage for the electronics and the higher voltage for the amplifiers. So that gets us through the cosmetic kind of overview here. What we've done is lay these out from starting on the first page here. This is the top end models from each brand, covering the RZ series. Here from Onkyo, which is our focus, is Onkyo in this video. And like we said, it starts with the 3100, which is on sale for $1,500. And that's equivalent to its peer. And you can see the groupings that we did. The first group there, the 904 with the 3500, the 3100. These are very similar products. They're both 7.2.4 processors, or 11.2, however you want to say it. This is with discrete subwoofer outputs for both sub outputs. So that gives you the full bore, 7.2.4 configuration. And then working your way down into the next groupings, you start to lose channels of at least amplification. So the RZ1100 from Onkyo, which is equivalent to the LX704, or similar to it, both at the same prices here, it is, while you still have the rear channel option, that has to be externally powered if you want 7.2.4. But it has all the capabilities internal to do 5.2.4. Looking at the final grouping on this page, we have the Pioneer 505, the Onkyo Rz50, which is Onkyo's new model, and the outgoing RZ840. And these are all 7.1.4 processors, or 11.1. And these are .1. Although they have two subwoofer physical outputs, these are wired in parallel. You cannot control these independently with these models. So you can see they start to drop things off. We'll get into the finer details here when we get to the other pages. We can see they all have a 1/4-inch phono jack. Here they're all, you've got Wi-Fi and Ethernet, and all have removable power supplies, all have AM/FM tuners, etc. So very robust as far as those items. And moving to the next page, this is where we drop, at least in the Onkyo range, from their RZ series to their NR network receiver range. Pioneer, these are still all elite models, so a difference in positioning there. The 305 and the NR7100 and the NR797 are kind of paired together, and you can see once again the price jump that Onkyo has when they're reintroducing the new models with the Dirac capability and the 8K. You're paying $300 more for the 7100 versus its counterpart, the 797. And we saw something similar in Pioneer, although Pioneer had a bigger gap in some cases between the the old generation and the 8K models. But these are all the same 9.1 type of receivers, and you do have to make a choice. Am I going to have 4 overheads, or am I going to have rear surrounds and only 2 overheads? So you can power all these things for either a 5.1.4 configuration or a 7.1.2 configuration. It's your choice, but it all adds up to 9.1. For the next grouping, you have the Pioneer LX105. That's the entry model from Pioneer. That's 8K. And the Onkyo NR6100 and the outgoing NR696. These are all 7.1 processors. Like the models above it, you have to make a choice between, do I want more height, do I want height speakers or rear surrounds? In this case, it's heights at all. So do you want it as a 5.1.2 configuration or a 7.1 configuration? And the entry tier, which there is no Pioneer model equivalent that we could find, you have the NR5100 and the outgoing NR595. And these are 7.1 models like the other one. You make that same choice, 5.1.2 or 7.1. But here the difference is in the power. These are 80-watt processors. And we'll go back through this because I did skip the amplification on all these. And you got to pay close attention because on some of these models, they have more processing capability in some cases than actual channels of amplification. And we kind of touched upon that, but I'm going to make sure this is clear. Of course, in this series here, if you subtract the subwoofer channel away, you actually get the right count. So it's an 8-channel processor. It has 8 channels of amplification and 1 subwoofer out. These 2 entry-level models, the 595 and the 5100, are 80 watts. If you go to the next grouping up, the 696, the 6100, they're 100 watts. But notice that the Pioneer equivalent is only 80 watts for 7 channels. Going up to the next tier, the Onkyo 797 and the 7100 and the Pioneer 305, these are 9 channels of amplification at 100 watts. And then looking once again at the RZ series, we're up to 9 channels of amplification for the RZ840, the RZ50, and the Pioneer LX505, and these are all at 120 watts. In the next grouping with the Pioneer 704 and the RZ1100 from Onkyo, we're at 9 channels, although there's a slight difference in output. Pioneer is 135 watts, Onkyo is 140. And then finally, we've got the top models from each brand, the 904 and the RZ3100, and these are 11 channels of amplification and 140 watts. And I believe these are all Class AB, not Class D, so these things are probably going to get hot. That gives you an overview summary of these models, but let's take a look what they're doing for their format support. So we're seeing in the RZ models as well as the Pioneer models equivalents that they have IMAX Enhance, They all have Dolby Vision support. They all have some form of calibration, but there's where some of the differences start to occur. Only the newer models, the 8K models from Pioneer and Onkyo, have support for Dirac Live. And this is exciting news because nobody was ever seemed to be jumping up and down about the proprietary room calibration software, whether that was the Pioneer's MCACC or Onkyo's AccuEQ. It did work, but maybe not enough to really capture the minds of the enthusiasts as being superior. Dirac, I think is the way you say it, has a very good reputation out there for room calibration, and it's nice to see it in Onkyo and Pioneer. It's been interesting that they decided to keep, even in the models that have Dirac, their proprietary calibration, so you have a choice of which ones you want to enable. So very interesting there. So those new models, that's a big plus. What you see here too is with Onkyo, they're not only the only brand within this manufacturer with THX support. We believe they're the only AV receivers out there with THX. We haven't been able to find another receiver or a processor made maybe in the last 5 years that have gone for THX certification. And of course, Onkyo touts themselves as being first to market when THX first came out with a THX certified receiver. And the higher end models, the 3100 and the 1100, have the Select 2 Plus certification. Of course, that's for one of the larger rooms. You can go to a THX video to find out what all these ratings really mean. But essentially, when you go to the larger, the better certifications, you can accommodate larger size rooms. And certainly these models are the Select 2 Plus versions of the certification. The Rz50, which is the highest model in the 8Ks, is only THX Select, not Select 2 Plus, as was the outgoing Rz840. Have THX. We see that the newer model, once again, are the ones with Dirac, although you're not going to get Dirac on their entry-level new models. So the 105, the 6100, and the 5100 don't have Dirac. You have to go to the 7100 to get that. You're stuck with the proprietary AccuEQ for Onkyo and MCACC for Pioneer. So keep that in mind. If you're excited about the Dirac, you got to go to at least the NR7100. The THX certifications are available also on the NR models, but they only go down to the NR696. You don't have that in the entry level 5100 or 595. So big difference there. And the other thing that drops off is IMAX Enhanced support. That's carried down to the 797, but not 6100 and below. And this equates to what Pioneer did with their 105 and taking the IMAX Enhanced out. So pay attention to what formats are supported, and if those are important to you, make sure you get the model that it's going to give you what you're expecting. Now let's take a look at the I/O for each of these. So this is what you see on the back of the unit. And let's start with the HDMI. Now, the higher end models, it kind of works its way down. You don't have quite the same balance between Pioneer and Onkyo. They didn't do a duplicate here. Onkyo has an extra channel on the high-end models. They have 7 inputs, but they have 1 less output. So they decided to shift it more to inputs than outputs, versus Pioneer is a 6.3 and the Onkyo is 7.2. So working our way down here, you go to the 505 down. Those are all 6.2, 6 inputs for HDMI, 2 outputs. And what you'll see here is the newer models, whether that was a firmware update or coming from the factory on day one, are eARC support. So you're not going to see eARC on the older models. Like Pioneer, the support for SPDIF inputs is a little stingy compared to competitors. Unless you get into their top models, starting with the Pioneer 704 and the 1100, which give you 2 coax and 3 optical. The rest of them are just 1 and 1. And we would like to see more, but we do realize that HDMI is really taking over the digital world. So as time goes on, we'll care less about that. But I still have a lot of source material, source devices that give me either coax or optical. And of course, I love to see the coax over optical. None of these are going to have XLR balanced inputs or outputs in any of these models. But in this series, the RZ series, you get pre-outputs. And so those are equating to what this thing processes. Whether it's 11.2 or 11.1, you get those pre-outputs in RCA format. For inputs, you are getting mostly 6, although Pioneer starts to drop those off with their 505 models with only 4 inputs. On the output part of this, you get zones. So there's 2 zones so that you can independently select what is going out to those channels. I will point out on some of the HDMI outputs, you may be limited as far as which ones you can put discrete inputs or which ones are just really a copy of what's in your main zone. This is because of limitations of the HDMI chip in general for any manufacturer today. Onkyo and Pioneer are holding on to some composite and component I/O, and some of you will like to see that. Ripewave, we have kind of moved away from those several years ago, over 10 years ago, so we're not using those anymore. All these models have a phono input, which is nice because you don't need another preamplifier if you have a phono graph here. And these are all, of course, moving magnet and not moving coil. And they have some trigger and IR I/O as well, which we'll cover a little later on. We talk about the integration. Now moving to the NR series here, again looking at the same grouping as we did before, we can see some of the same trends here, that the newer models have eARC. These are pretty much 6 inputs, 6 outputs, except for when you get to the NR5100, it's now 4 inputs. Now we will call out to a variation in the 6100, and this was a late add because Onkyo isn't putting the 6100 on their webpage. We have to go to other sources, such as retailers like Crutchfield, etc. But I did notice in the video that Home Theater Fanatics did, they did have a good close-up of the back of the 6100, and they went into detail talking about how those inputs are split in the back of there, that only half of them are 8K 60, 4K 120, whereas the other 3 inputs are 4K 60. And from what we could tell, this is only with the 6100, but looking closely at the Pioneer, we see they've done the same thing with the VX105, is split those 6 inputs into 4K and 8K and so forth. Likewise with the ARC versus eARC, it's the older models that only have ARC, so be careful there of eARC. I think that should be an important thing for you when you're selecting. I would avoid those that just have ARC to keep you ready for the future. For the digital audio here, it's all 1 and 1, 1 coax, 1 optical. Again, no balanced I/O. But here we see that on all these models, in the NR series, you're not going to have any pre-outputs other than your subwoofer outputs. So keep that in mind. Now, Pioneer keeps the pre-outputs going into the 305 and 105 through that whole elite range. So you get 9.1 pre-outs on the 305 and 7.1 outputs on the 105. So if you want to send the signal to external amplifiers, do not get the Onkyo NR series. Stick with Pioneer Elite or move up to the RZ series. Composite component audio video drops off after the 797, so the 105, 6100 down, you don't have any of those legacy video inputs. They all have the moving magnet phono stage, so you're all good there. You will notice starting with the 6100, there is no triggers or infrared wired connection. Now let's take a look at the DACs here. We're as with the Pioneer, in some cases with the newer models, we're not seeing a publication of what the DACs are. They do output what the processor's putting out for signal to noise, etc. So at least we have those specifications. But what we do know is from the prior generations that Pioneer and Onkyo use different brand or have used different brand DACs. Pioneer uses ESS and Onkyo has used AKM in their more recent generations. So if you look at the top models here, the Onkyo 3100 and the 1100 use AKM 4490 for the base layers and the 4458 for the surround channels. What Pioneer has done is they've gone ESS. Some people prefer ESS, some people don't, but that's the 9026 Pro, and they're using it two chips there for all for both the base and the surrounds. So they're using the same chip for both of those. There's subtle differences in the specs for those chips, but it's interesting at the bottom, at the end of the day, what Pioneer and Onkyo are specifying for output is the same. They got the same signal to noise, 108 dB for these upper models. They're all specifying a THD of 0.04%. They're all putting out supporting 24-bit 192 hertz PCM conversion. They're all claiming DSD64 via the HDMI port. So it's all ultimately the same. Now, would some would ASR measure these the same? Maybe not, but this is at least the manufacturer claim. Looking at the 505 and from Pioneer and the Rz50, we don't know what those chips are, but they're both signal to noise 106, so slightly lower than the upper tier, and it's 0.08% distortion versus 0.04, but it's the same PCM and DSD ability to convert there. We do know that the 840 is using a AK4458 chip throughout there, and that of course has lower specifications than the 4490. Looking at the NR series here, we see that same specification all the way through, 106 dB signal to noise with a 0.08% THD. And this is whether it's Pioneer or Onkyo at this pricing tier, they've got the specs exactly the same. So we're showing here that for ones we know about, these are AKM 4458s. We don't know the new models, but again, at the end of the day, these all have the same claim output. Getting into networking, the specs are all the same. They all support Ethernet, they all support Wi-Fi, they all support Bluetooth inputs, so like from your mobile phone, but only a few models, the new models, support Bluetooth output. So this is out to sound bars, other speakers, headphones, etc. A lot of people like that convenience factor. Personally, we feel that it's better to have your outputs all wired, but it is when you have difficult wiring situations, Bluetooth is the way to go. And I understand now that there's now a lossless Bluetooth coming, so that could mean good things going forward. Whether Onkyo Pioneer adopt that lossless format, we'll wait and see. So this whole trend carries through the whole line, that the new models have the Bluetooth output. Otherwise, on the networking, it's all the same. Now, we talked about the HDMI already, but what you'll see here in this chart is that the older models are all HDMI 1.4. We're guessing a little with Pioneer because they didn't specify it on their literature, but we assume it's 1.4 on the older models. The new models are all 2.1 with 2.3 HDCP with eARC. Now, some of the older models do have eARC support, and that came with a firmware update, even though not being 2.1 compatible. The output formats, they all support 4K 60. The newer models support 4K at 120 Hertz, but also 8K at 60 Hertz. And this is going to be good for your gaming systems, at least at this point. The newer models add support for HDR10+. This is only important if your TV supports the 10+ standard. I believe that's Samsung and its partners. Dolby Vision is carried through at least the RZ series, and IMAX Enhance is there as well as HLG and Rec 2020. Looking at the NR series, the same can be said about this page here. I'll just point out here again that IMAX is dropped in the lower tier models. And when it comes to control, this is where it's getting a little tricky. We see that the newer models support Alexa for voice control and Google Assistant. And don't confuse Google Play with Google Assistant and Amazon Music with Alexa support. You got to look specifically for those items. None of them claim a Siri or a Josh support for the voice control. For protocol, I may have marked this one different, but I'll tell you, there's nothing in the Onkyo Pioneer literature that says that you can control these devices through Ethernet, although we suspect they probably have it. We just wonder why they're not claiming it in their literature. So until they do, we're not going to put it into our spreadsheet here. But they do have integration through infrared wired connections, as noted here. It's interesting that Pioneer does have IR outputs, which aren't seen in the Onkyo models, maybe because they realize that Integra is really for their integration. But you do see a 232 port on all these RZ series models, as well as trigger outputs, but only 1 versus 2 in the Pioneer. And they only, like Pioneer, they're only mentioning control support, but if you check with each of these other companies, whether it's Savant, RTI, Creston, etc., they might also have support. We just don't know without doing additional research. Looking at the NR series, the trend continues around this, but all integration, whether that's IR 232 and triggers, drop off after the 6100 models. So I think if you're interested in doing some home integration work, at least go up to the 797 series in Onkyo and above. Streaming ecosystems. So the oldest, it's interesting, the flagship models, the 1100 and 3100, all you talk about AirPlay. We wonder if there's a firmware upgrade that also has AirPlay 2. Maybe it does, but all the other models support AirPlay 2 and Chromecast as well. And the Sonos ecosystem and on these RZ series. Roon is being tested now on the newest models with the 8K models. Spotify is there in DTS Play-Fi, and something which we believe is unique to Onkyo Pioneer is Flare Connect. So that is there in Onkyo as well as Pioneer. Moving to the NR series, it's all AirPlay 2. We see Chromecast being dropped from the 595. Roon is not available on the older 595, 696, and 797, but it carries all the way down to the 5100 in the newer models. Everything else is carried through. Looking at internet streaming, we saw no variations between models here. They all going to give you Amazon Prime Music, Apple Music via AirPlay 2. So I think you have to go through. I don't think it's a direct connection because the literature doesn't talk about it. Deezer, Pandora, Spotify, Sirius XM, Tidal. I think they mentioned one other, which I don't have listed here, but pretty good. It's not as comprehensive as some other brands, but there you go. And the same thing with the NR series, so no change there. Looking at the remotes, Pioneer and Onkyo share remote platforms. The older models, it is really the generation of product that you get. So from 2016 to 2017, the remotes looked a certain way. I think they're probably backlit 2 for the 1100 and 3100. We could check on that. But the 704, 904 from Pioneer are backlit. And the other ones don't appear to be, but they're all the same. Whether you're looking at Onkyo or Pioneer, maybe the color of the button might look a little different. The brand on it's different, but slight variations maybe between models. But the remotes are all shared, particularly on the NR series, right across the board, all the same remote. Looking at the dimensions, as you would expect, as you move up in models or down, and as we've been going here, the products get a little smaller. The widths stay about the same. The depths change. The heights change. You move up or down in weight. So their top line model is a whopping 43 pounds, 19.5 kilograms, and this works all its way down to the entry-level model, the NR595, which is half its weight at 20.7 pounds, 9.4 kilograms. There's variations in the power consumption. If this is a concern here, and this doesn't align up to the number of amplifiers within or the wattages they're putting out. I mean, these things start with the 9-channel 140 watt, starting around 310, 320 watts of consumption, and some of the highest consuming ones like the 7100 is 750 watts. So some variations there. Looking at the front panels a little closer, we couldn't find a good picture of the new Onkyo models with the door down. We did see in their manual the layout of these, and it looks like the exact same layout as the prior generation. So I stuck in here the photo from the prior generation. I bet that's they haven't changed it. Similar to what Pioneer puts out there, Pioneer has a few more buttons in there to do your navigations, although I think just a little different placement and arrangement. Comparing the screens here, I think they pretty much adopt the same UI, although you're going to see different functions in each. Just note that they both have on-screen display, but they also have a web-based display. And then when you get into either music playback, you have the Pioneer app or the Onkyo app. And then with the Dirac, you can do mobile with your Dirac as well. And that could be on a tablet, or you can be running it from the laptop, or you could be doing it from your phone. And so there's some options there of running your room calibration, which is good because you can sit back away from the measurement area. And that covers down all the features of the new Onkyo and how it ranges and how they compare with Pioneer. And I hope you found this useful. Clearly, there isn't a cut and dry one's better than the other. You really got to look at the combination of what they're delivering. Is it for you? Is it not for you? And pick whether you're a Pioneer person, Onkyo, or are you really for some other brand. And and they're all receivers now. While we've seen in the past them having some processor models, we don't see that in their lineup today. So I hope this is useful to you. What are you thinking? Are you more a Pioneer person or an Onkyo person? Are you leaning towards the RZ series, like the new Rz50, or are you a Pioneer Elite, or are you okay with the more entry level NR series from Onkyo? And of course, we didn't cover the Integra. Maybe you prefer Integra there. Those comments would be useful to the Ripewave audio community, and please include them. We'd love to have your discussion. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to this Ripewave audio community, and be sure to hit the bell icon so you're notified when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.